Well, hi. Welcome once again to Unstoppable Mindset. I'm really looking forward to our guest today, Kristin Smedley, because she has two sons who are blind. I'm not prejudiced or anything like that, of course, but nevertheless, yeah, nevertheless, she's got some interesting stories to tell, and she has been involved in doing a variety of things, including influencing Washington, dealing with forming organizations, and we're going to get into all that. So I will not talk anymore, but Kristin, let's just start with you. Welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm happy to be here and chat.
Well, thanks for coming on. Well, tell us a little bit about you first. Growing up, the early Kristin, as it were.
The early Kristin, all those years ago.
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
I am a born and raised Philly girl. I have my Phillies hat on for those that are watching this on video. And I was one of those kids, Michael, that I went for a lot of stuff. I had success in almost every area of my life. I was raised by parents I'm learning as an adult that I was raised in unconditional love. And I believe, I've said it a lot, that I believe that's what sets us up with a foundation to thrive. So I had a good support system to get out there and try stuff and go after dreams. And I was sports, school, I mean, you name it. I had a great time with it. But I will admit that above all things, I was a planner, and a list maker and a check it off the list kind of person. So I really liked making plans, achieving them, celebrating, and going on to the next thing. I've played soccer my whole life. I still play, actually. I'm going to be 52, and just last year I perfected my left foot kick. So I figure, I'm a quick study, right?
But you weren't invited to New Zealand for the World Cup this year, huh?
Weird, right? And I was just looking at the pay rate of the top 10 women's players, and I wasn't on there, and I'm nowhere near that pay rate. So what's that about?
Yeah, really.
I've been playing longer than them.
So that ought to count for something.
But yeah, I was competitive and loved sports, and being a Philly person, I don't know many people in our town that aren't Philly sports people, but I had a good time. I have 4 brothers. It was a crazy house, very big family, lots of cousins. And, just a typical kind of kid growing up with dreams to be a teacher, achieved all of that. And nothing really derailed plans at all until it did.
And then it wasn't so much derailed, but it also goes to show that sometimes plans need to change. So along the way, you got a husband or whatever, and did all that sort of stuff, I assume.
I did all the things that everybody did, right? And I mean, back then it was. I mean, like I said, I'm going to be 52. Back then, there wasn't a whole lot of options that girls like me grew up with as careers. My family was like, there was absolutely no way that there was a future in soccer or sports for women back then. But I knew I was going to be a teacher from the time I was 5 years old. I'm one of those bizarre people that just knew it from when I was very young. I would set up my 4 brothers in my dad's workshop at the back of our basement. He had this chalkboard, and I would bring home the extra handouts from teachers at school. And I would have I don't know why my brothers sat and did that with me. I'd hand stuff out and I'd have them writing on the board.
They tolerated you.
They sure did tolerate. That's a great word, because they're still doing that.
I was just going to ask you if they still do that.
They still tolerate me. They don't sit and let me give them handouts anymore.
Give them lectures anymore. Yeah. Well, what did you teach when you grew up and started teaching?
I was an elementary school teacher. Yeah.
So was my wife.
I loved it. I just, my whole life I wanted to do that. And then when I was in the classroom, oh boy, did I have a good time with that.
What grade did you want to teach, or what grade did you find was your favorite grade?
Well, I will say first and third. I never would have thought when I was planning to be a teacher, I thought second grade was where it was at. Like that was where I really wanted to land. And I remember student teaching first grade, and the first week, I remember coming back to the house I lived in with a bunch of my friends at college, and they were like, they thought I had caught like a massive flu or something. I was exhausted, Michael. I was exhausted. 5 days with first graders. And I remember saying to my roommates, you even have to include in your directions not to eat the paste.
Oh my gosh.
You have to be very specific with first graders. But I love the fact that first graders they kind of believe what you tell them. They haven't really formed their own individual personality. Some of them have, but most of them are along for a really fun ride,
Yeah.
Third grade, though, they start developing their own personalities and the things that they know that they want to do. But you're still cool. Third graders still think that teachers are cool.
Yeah.
Fourth grade, they start to go, maybe not. So I wanted to stay in the cool zone.
My wife loved third grade. She thought that was the best grade to teach. It's definitely the earlier grades, but she loved third grade the best because, as you said, kids started to develop a personality, but you could affect it. You could teach them. They would listen. But when you got beyond that, especially when you got to 6th and 7th grade, much less high school, of course, that got to be a real challenge.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I have one of my best friends. We actually met at college orientation. She's taught middle school science for her whole career. And I'm like, man, are we different? I could not, I wouldn't accomplish anything with middle schoolers. But first and third grade, I'm your girl. That was a good time.
I suppose the idea of middle school science, though, is if you do interesting experiments and you do things that they don't expect, that is because they haven't really learned about a lot of that stuff, you can sort of keep their interest.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point because Stacy has kept it. She makes things incredibly interesting, and I'm like, oh my goodness, shoot! There's been times we've been sitting and hanging out drinking wine, and she'll start showing me this PowerPoint of like scientific stuff, and I'm like, and she's so into it. I'm thinking, okay, now I get it. I know why. I know why the kids were into it for all those years.
Yeah, but she's got the knack of being able to make it interesting for the kids, and of course, that's the issue, right?
Right.
Yeah. and you're still teaching third grade in, as you said, the cool zone, so that helps a lot. But I know what you're saying. I remember, oh gosh, now it's been about 18 years ago. I was doing a talk in San Francisco, and I went to the school. It was an elementary school, K through 6, and the whole school was there. It was an assembly, and the teacher said, now look, you can't talk more than 15 minutes. They will not sit and listen to you. And I was sitting there going, just wait. So, of course, I come out with my guide dog, Roselle. If that isn't going to keep kids' interest, give me a break.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like about 40 minutes after we started talking all about dogs, and I talked a little bit about the World Trade Center, of course, but it was mostly what the dog did and how guide dogs worked. And they all sat there in rapt attention. Wow. Then I finally opened the door to questions. And as I tell people, there's no question that anyone can ask me today that's off limits, because this third grade kid gets up, a guy, right? A boy. And his question was, how do blind people have sex?
Oh my God. Wow.
And so, no questions off limits. Well, I'm not dumb. I just said the same way everybody else does. And if you want to know more, you go ask your parents. I'm not an idiot, but there's no question off limits. I've remembered that story ever since. But then the teachers came up afterwards and they said, we don't know how you did it. And I said, it's the dog. And it's talking about the dog. And even the 6th graders were all interested. And of course, everybody wanted to come and talk to the dog. So after it was over, I said at the end that if anybody wants to come up and visit with the puppy dog, they are welcome to do that. I knew Roselle very well. Roselle was one of those dogs who had discovered the scientific principle of maximum petting area. She would lay down on the floor and stretch out every appendage as far as she could to get as many people petting her at one time as she could get. And she loved it.
That's so sweet.
And all of my guide dogs have been that way. And I wouldn't want it any other way. The harness was off and they just all love it. And of course the kids love it. And the teachers kept an eye on things, but still everyone got to come up and spend some time with Roselle. And she thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Although she'd eat the sliced bread too, but But yeah, third graders, my wife always loved third graders and we talk about it a lot. My teaching was at the high school level. I got a secondary teaching credential, ended up going into other jobs, but I have my secondary teaching credential and taught. And I've actually had kids from my classes come up to me like 10 years later and say, "Do you remember me?" And the voices of course, all change. And I go, "No." Well, like one guy, "I'm Marty. I was an 8th grader in your Algebra 1 class in high school. And I remember coming into class and talking with you and solving problems with you." And Marty actually one day asked me a question and I didn't know the answer. I just didn't happen to remember it. And I said, "I'll go find out the answer, but I don't know it." And then the next day I came in with the answer, but Marty did as well. And I said, "All right, you come up and write it on the board." My master teacher said, "That was incredibly smart. You did the best thing you could do because these kids will know if you're blowing smoke." And the fact that you said that you didn't know scored you so many points. And that's really true. And I think it's true today in anything that we do. Rather than bluffing your way through, it's better to be honest.
Totally agree. And kids they can definitely tell. So
every time.
Oh yeah.
No doubt about it. Every single time they can tell those things. Well, so you taught, and how long did you teach?
A few years. And then I, at the time I was married, we moved to Chicago. And that was after an extremely challenging 3rd grade year with a great group of kids. But I remember at the end of that year saying, if I could survive that year, I can survive anything. Never should have said that out loud because then all kinds of things happened. But I ended up going, which was pretty cool. I wanted to take a break from the classroom for a little bit and was working with the Department of Ed. And this is how old I am now. That was back when we would go in and teach teachers and principals how to use technology in the classroom.
There are probably a lot of them that still need that, but I hear you.
Oh yeah, we actually organized big educational conferences, and it's funny how my life has gone, because I said I had planned to be a teacher, always wanted to be a teacher, stayed in the teaching profession, but then as I watch everything that unfolded, like planning those conferences and working with teams that were in-house and remote, like it's all the things I'm doing now. All of those experiences gave me experience in being able to do the stuff I do now. So I always say to people, when you seem to have a roadblock or taking a different path for a little while, or maybe making a right turn where you thought you were going straight, pay attention, because every experience gives you tools for stuff that's coming later.
Yeah. And I think most successful people are the ones who realize that and who can actually trace back and remember when they learned those tools and what they learned. I believe our lives are really comprised of all the choices that we make. And all too often we forget the choices we make. And I think it's important. And I work very hard at remembering what led me to where I am. And it doesn't mean that it was bad. Even if it didn't turn out the way I expected to, there's still things you learn along the way.
Yeah. I'll even take that a step further and say, I'm realizing now, like literally within the past 7-8 months, when a sidestep or something or a setback happens, I now pay attention in the moments of new things that I need to learn, new perspectives that I need to have my eyes open to. Like instead of waiting until later, like I always did, now I'm actually on one of my friends, Chip Baker says, grow through your go through. So when you're going through something, what are all the growth opportunities that you can have your eyes open to? And I'm telling you, it makes it not that it takes struggle away or stress away, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier.
It does, because everything that you do is a learning experience, no matter whether you think you learned something or not. You did.
Mm-hmm.
And just, we don't pay nearly as much attention to that, which is not really the way it ought to be. But I love that. Grow through your go through.
Yeah.
Tongue twister, but still, that's great. Well, so you've referred to it a whole bunch of times. So things sort of started to make you deviate, and you had sudden unexpected changes. Tell us about some of that, if you would.
Yeah, I was at a point in my life where the Kristin in the year 2000, I can tell you that Kristin of 2023, I'm not sure that they would be friends because Kristin of back then had, like I said, I had planned to be a teacher. I had planned to be successful. I had planned to get married. I accomplished everything. I had, gotten the degree, landed the job, married the guy, got the big house, bought the brand new SUV, and my final, not necessarily final dream, but my biggest dream of all was finally coming to fruition, and that was becoming a mom. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, Michael, I had an incredible mom. I have a wonderful role model for a mom, and my grandmother, her mom was wonderful. And I was surrounded by a lot of people that were really good moms. And I, of course, being competitive, couldn't wait to be a mom and do even better, right? Like I was even going to be even better than all of them. And most people, they find out they're pregnant and they're like, I just want a healthy baby. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. And then when you're me, by like month 8, it's, is he going to be a pitcher for the Phillies or quarterback for the Eagles? Right. And is he, what college will he go to? And, you're envisioning all of the things. And when he was born, Michael was born in January of 2000. And on our street, now, if you remember back then, it was Y2K was happening, and this was January. Like we survived the computers, right? But I didn't even realize it at the time. There were so many people trying to have a Y2K baby. So on my street in January, there was like 8 people had babies within 8 days of each other. It was crazy. So everyone was in the hoopla of new babies and the hospital stays, and we would all be, we weren't necessarily outside in Chicago in January, but we'd be in each other's kitchens talking about all the things and that book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. We knew every line of every page and all that stuff and talked about everything. And then I started noticing something about Michael was different from the other kids. And I had gone back to work and had him, a friend of mine who's a nurse was babysitting him every day. And I said to her, is it weird that when you lay him down on his back, his eyes swirl around and disappear? And she said, yeah, it is weird. You need to have that checked out. And after a few weeks of no answers and lots of tests, we finally flew home to Philly and got an appointment with a specialist at Children's Hospital, Philadelphia. And that's where I heard a sentence that I had not planned for. And that's when he said to me, Kristin, your son is blind. And, the planner in me, that was not in the plans. Like valedictorian, summa cum laude, professional athlete, those were the plans. And in that moment, I got to tell you this, I can say it now. I was embarrassed about this for years, but since my kids are successful and I turned out okay, I can tell you my first question to that doctor was like, I was trying to consider how blind. I didn't understand blindness, right? And I said, will he play baseball? Can you imagine that doctor probably tells that story at parties all the time? I'll bet you at conferences with other ophthalmologists, right? What's the dumbest question you ever heard? Yeah, I said, will he play baseball? Because I was trying to get it in my mind I just had absolutely zero knowledge of blindness. And the doctor, of course, said, no, he's not going to play baseball. And it was like everything. Will he drive? No. Will he go to school? Probably not a regular school. All the things. And I said, oh my gosh, well, what is he going to do? And the doctor said, I have no idea, but good luck. Now.
Oh, that was nice.
Right. And, and I'm like, well, that was 23 years ago when that happened, but it's still happening. Doctors are still saying,
yeah,
I don't know what to tell you. I have one of my friends that has choroideremia. He says, doctors are saying, go home, go blind. We got nothing for you. So we can get into that later, but.
Well, we can, because it's absolutely worth doing. Doctors still believe that if they can't save your eyesight, they're failures. Ophthalmology schools don't teach that eyesight really isn't the only game in town, which doesn't mean you don't try to save eyesight, but eyesight's not the only game in town. And we don't deal with that nearly enough.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, I've often talked with folks about the fact that, that there's that first do no harm for doctors. And I think it is more than harmful to not send a family on their way with some kind of resources or one resource. That's ultimately why I ended up writing my first book. I'm like, if no one's if there's no resource to hand them, we're going to make a resource to hand over. But yeah, that's where I started. And I was actually just talking with somebody yesterday about this concept in terms of parenting. I believe now, when I heard those words and heard good luck, I literally crashed to the floor, and all of my dreams had crashed to the floor. And I had no education, knowledge, experience with blindness. Mm-hmm. I will say, I think the greatest thing that happened to me in my life was that all of my dreams for my kids crashed to the floor, because when I'm noticing, even myself, I do have a sighted daughter also. With kids, I'm seeing our biggest struggles, their biggest struggles and stress come from they're walking around with carrying the weight of their own dreams and ambition, but they also have ours on top of them. And one of the greatest things that ever happened to me and my kids was that everything that I had planned for them was eliminated because I didn't think it was possible. And I had to literally I said to the boys, I'm going to get you what you need and follow your lead, because I have no idea where this is going. Thank God. Thank God it wasn't anything that I had intended for them that they went after, and because that would have been such a limited life when I look back on their where they're at now.
So what caused Michael's blindness?
So we would find out later that the umbrella disease, it's an early retinitis pigmentosa. It's Leber's congenital amaurosis. Okay. And I didn't find out until 2009 that it's the CRB1 gene causing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and with each pregnancy, now for all the math minds out there, you'll love this part, and everyone else just hang in there because I don't talk about math all that long. I do have lip gloss on, so I don't do math and statistics when I wear lip gloss. It's a rule that I have. But with CRB1 LCA, there's a 25% chance with each pregnancy that the child will be affected. Mm-hmm. Now, optimistic Kristin, which people have said that my memoir could be titled Delirious Optimist, heard 25% chance and stopped listening. So I was like, well, I already, 1 in 4 babies, I already had one, so we're good, and then I remember one of the specialists was like, no, Kristin, with each pregnancy. So it took me a while to get my head around how I was going to raise Michael. But I have to say, and I believe the statistics are still that most LCA families, there's, I think, 30 genes now identified in LCA, but most LCA families, once they have the LCA child, they don't have any after that. Because most people don't want to hear a second diagnosis, don't want to experience a second diagnosis. I was quite optimistic, but when I was really weighing all of it, to be honest, I thought, I started interviewing people. I'm a little bit of a nerd like that. Like I want to have as much information as I possibly can. And I talk to everybody that I possibly can. And I went and talked to people that I knew that were only children, because I couldn't get my head around blindness, but I could not get my head around an only child, and heard pros and cons of it and everything. And I thought ultimately I would have a harder time raising a child that was a single child than raising a child that couldn't see. I figured I could figure out blindness much faster and better than I could figure out how to have an only child. I guess it was just, I was 28 at that time. And my experience had just been a big family was all I knew. And gosh, it was crazy, but boy, did we have a heck of a lot of fun with cousins and everything. So, ultimately I was like, let's go for it. And I was like, come on, what are the chances? Really? Like I'm always in that 75% camp. I'm always on the better end of statistics, right? Oh my goodness. And then a family member always says with a very cynical tone that we hit the lottery twice, because Mitchell was diagnosed with CRB1 LCA also. But I will say that I do say we hit the lottery 3 times. All 3 of my kids are extraordinary human beings. And I can't even imagine if it was if I had an only child. I mean, I love Michael. He's great. But the dynamics of what all 3 of them have brought to my world are just incredible.
And they're all different.
Oh boy, are they all different. The one retina specialist in Boston said after a day of testing, he goes, Kristin, and he experienced the boys for the day. He said, they are different down to their retinas. Even their retinas aren't the same at all.
So now we measure difference by our retinas. Okay, it works. But going back to what we talked about earlier, the whole issue of how the medical profession deals with it, it is so frustrating. I mean, you read Thunderdog?
I read that years ago.
Yeah. So you read my story, and the doctors told my parents that they should just send me to a home because no child who is blind could ever amount to anything. And my parents said no. And we went from there. I don't know, never really talked about their fears. But I think if I had asked my parents, tell me about your fears, they would have said, no, we just assumed you would grow up to do whatever you chose to do. I think the fears were there in one way or another, but they just felt that, so, all right, you're blind. We'll deal with it. And they were risk takers by any standard, but I don't even think they would classify themselves as risk takers. They were very unusual in the way they approached it, but they did. And the fact is that I got to grow up and do the things I wanted to do. And I always wanted to teach, but I never ended up actually doing teaching in the classroom past student teaching. But I learned along the way that when I was confronted with a situation where I would either lose a job or go from doing scientific human factor studies into sales, and chose to, as I love to say, lower my standards and go from science to sales, that in reality, in reality, sales is, if you do it right, more teaching than anything else in the world. It's all about teaching, and it's all about helping people understand, but it's also because of that about listening. And it's important to do all of that. But the fact is that blind kids have as much opportunity to grow, or should have as much opportunity to grow and be whatever they choose, as anyone else. And part of the burden that we face is the prejudice that everyone has about blindness.
You know what? That's oh my gosh, I'm taking a deep breath, because it is so frustrating to me that in this day and age that bias is still there with all of the, you feel like you do all this advocacy and your stories out there. My social media platforms are huge, and there's all these other stories out there, and people still have no idea. I just did an event here in my town where my boys have grown up and done all kinds of things. And you're kind of, it's hard to not be famous in a small town when you got two blind kids. I mean, everybody knows who we are. Everyone has seen all the stuff that they do. And I did an event with a short film that I just co-created about the bias against blindness and hiring people that are blind. And after the film, people that have watched, elected officials that I know very well, incredibly smart, successful people were coming up to me saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea that people could do all the things. And I was like, but you had two examples in front of you for 2 decades. How is that possible? I guess they figured my kids were some anomaly or I was constantly opening doors for them. I don't know, but they were blown away. And it was a weird, I don't know what the word is for it. I have to go into Chat GPT to give me some words for this, but it was like angry and happy at the same time. They're not angry, astonished.
Yeah.
And happy at the same time that the 20-minute video got through to them. But I thought, how could you not know? But that is how it is.
Well, and I joined the National Federation of the Blind in 1972. It's a consumer organization. I'm sure you've heard of it. And it does a lot of things. But even with a lot of blind consumers who have adopted a philosophy that blindness isn't the problem, we are not having a lot of success at changing people's attitudes, not nearly the success that we have to have in order to truly make it possible for us to have the same opportunities as everyone else. And consumer organizations can help. They do help. The National Federation of the Blind and its legal efforts changed the insurance industry so that blind people could buy insurance. Back in the 1980s, no blind or other person with a disability, physical disability, could buy insurance because the insurance industry said, you have a higher mortality rate, you're a higher risk. And what happened was that somebody came along and said, you do everything based on scientific data and evidence, where's the proof? And they said, well, we have it, but they could never produce it because it didn't really exist. It was all based on prejudice. So by around 1985, legislation had been passed in every state saying you can't discriminate unless you got the proof. But the fact is it was still there, and it's still the attitudes. And even that didn't deal with it. And I think part of if I were to say one thing that doesn't happen that needs to really make a difference is we've got to become more part of the conversation, the whole human dialogue. And we're just not. Even some of the so-called disability experts don't push enough. We need to be in the conversation a lot more.
Oh, I 100% agree. And we also need to be in every facet of life that sighted people are in, right? I think that's why I'm so passionate with stories, with especially the children's book that I just put out, and film and Hollywood. I tell you this, I put a post on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go with Twitter
That's
for now.
another story. Yeah.
Oh my God. Anyway, I put a post about my son, Mitch, who's home for the summer from college. In our home, we are addicted to the show Suits. I don't know if you follow that show.
I don't. I've heard of it. I got to watch it. I got to start.
Oh my gosh. Well, now it's on Netflix, and we're rewatching the whole series. We watched it through COVID, and now we're rewatching it. And it is just, it's attorneys and it's egos, and it's just great. We love it. And we all have our favorite characters. Well, Mitchell, who just turned 20 years old, literally jumped out of his stool. He sits on this funny little stool that cracks me up. This big, tall 20-year-old with an attitude, right? Sits on this little stool in front of this giant TV and is glued to the show, jumps off the stool and bounces into the kitchen yelling, "Mom, Netflix put audio description on Suits."
Yeah.
You would have thought that he just got like the bike he always wanted for Christmas, like he was so excited. So I put a post out on Twitter that said, oh my gosh, that feeling when your son bounces in the room. And I put a thing about how him announcing that Netflix put audio description on Suits. And I said, thank you so much, Netflix, for being inclusive, whatever. I did a hashtag that the Suits, I didn't realize how passionate the Suits community is about that hashtag. It is now, I think it's at 7,000 people it's reached. People went crazy. We didn't know that was a thing. Oh my gosh, tell us more. What is audio description? And then now it's like this teachable moment, but people have absolutely no idea that something like that is out there. But it also, I went back to my point of when people that are blind are involved in all facets of life, that's when the education really starts to spread. And that's when perspectives are shifted. And that's when I see the bias disappear. I mean, when my boys, oh my gosh, I'm writing the screenplay now for and I just wrote out the scene that we experienced when Michael told me he wanted to play Little League baseball in our town when he was 9. I mean, he was playing blind baseball in the city, but he was going to public school, and he wanted in on those lunchtime conversations where all the kids are screaming at each other of whose team cheated and which umps suck and all that stuff, right? And he's like, I want to play baseball. I said, you do play baseball? And he's like, no, I want to play baseball here in this league where all my friends play. And when I walked up on registration day to baseball registration day. When I talk about this, I should actually have like a button I hit with music that's like, it's more than Disney World and all these happy cheering people that are there for registration. And Michael walked in with his white cane and said he wanted to play baseball. And as grouchy and grumpy as the commissioner is of a person, I will give him credit that he did give it some thought. And long story short, Michael ended up on a baseball team. And in his second year, they won the championship. Like, they were the worst team in the league and came back and won the championship. And he was an all-star and led the team in RBIs. And there was a dad that I knew was not happy Michael was on that team at the first practice that came up to me after that championship win. And he said, Kristin, when all of our kids started this season and came together, they were all just a bunch of spoiled kids that get everything they want. And he said, one by one, your son changed all of them. And that changed all of us. And watching him has been phenomenal. And I thought, that's what it is. It's when we're out in the world in all facets of life, doing life, that we change those perceptions and those biases. So I want people that are blind and visually impaired and their parents and everybody around them, get out there in the world. And like you said, be in the conversations, be in the experiences. And if we can multiply that, then I think that we can really get rid of this bias a lot faster.
So how did Michael play baseball?
Well, interesting. Now I'm in so many conversations, in the DE&I stuff and workplaces, and we keep saying reasonable accommodation. I'm like, well, I didn't know it was what I was asking at the time, but it was reasonable accommodations. We weren't changing rules. We didn't change much, but he was able to hit off a tee. Now this is 9, 10, 11-year-olds. They were kid pitching, hit off a tee, and he played in the outfield with another guy. That guy would field the ball, and Michael had to throw it in to where the play was. Okay. And I've actually spoken at some sports stuff, and on the topic of parents and sports, I always say, listen, for coaches, you have a problem with parents and vocal parents and how parents have become a nightmare at youth sports. Get a blind kid on your team, because when Michael would get the ball, when that guy would hand it to him in the outfield, he had to listen to one voice to know where to throw the ball. So the kids learned quick, and they shut the parents down even quicker. Nobody, as soon as he got that ball, it would be silent. And one person, if the play was at second, that kid would stand there and call Michael's name, and he could throw that ball to him on a dime. It was really cool. Now, for people that are listening, they're thinking, okay, at this point, Michael's 9.5, 10. And I'm saying to him, you have to hit off a tee. He did not initially, he wasn't on board with that. He was like, no one's hitting off a tee. That's stupid. There is no tee in this league. I want to swing at the pitches like everybody else. And it was an interesting conversation that night that I said, you can do that if you're against the T and you think that that's what you should be doing. But let's think about this. I've seen this age group pitch. There is no consistency. It's not like they're even going to try to help you out and direct that pitch, And I said, and we're not changing the rule. You still only get 3 strikes and you're out. And Michael's a very scientific, math-minded kind of kid. I said, what's the probability that you're going to hit that ball with that kid pitching it? So then he went into a whole thing about velocity and, oh my God, he like nerded out on science about the ball not moving and an object not moving. And I was like, guess what? I turned his light off. I'm like, good night. We'll talk about this tomorrow. And the next morning we sat there eating breakfast and he said, I'm not happy about having to hit off a tee, but I don't want to let the team down. And I don't want to be that guy that they can count on will be an out every time I get to the plate. So he did. He had to set up the tee on his own, put the ball on there, and he got, if he missed it 3 times, he was out. He never did miss 3 times. He got on base almost every single time. He actually led the team in RBIs that very first season. And I said, you didn't contribute by hitting a home run, but you sure did set everybody else up to cross home plate.
I presume he had to practice a lot, though, to be able to hit it and make good contact.
Oh my gosh, the practicing. I will say this for parents that are listening. I want to make sure I reemphasize, he did start in blind baseball. Like he had people that were trained in how to teach a blind child baseball. So he knew the mechanics of swinging the bat, connecting with the ball, throwing the ball. Like he knew all that. And then we just did. I mean, I played softball my whole childhood. So I have some skill there, and we just practiced and practiced and practiced. And we would get to the games early and run the bases, just so he had that memory of where those bases were when he ran. And his coach the first year, this guy, Rich, who was absolutely tremendous. He was on board with everything, but he did not want him out there running on his own and having a sound box or something at the bases. That was where he drew the line. He was too nervous. So I said, okay, he was on board with everything else. Let's not have him have a stroke here. Let's okay. So Rich would run with him. But as Michael got more and more confident and really knew where those bases were, he was getting faster and faster. Yeah. And then there was a play in the one game, and it was a tight game. And the kid just clocked this ball, and everyone on base. Michael was at first. The bases were loaded. Now they're running and they're rounding the bases, and Michael and Rich are running, and they turn third, and Michael just guns it for home, and he outran Rich. So then all the parents, instead of cheering for Michael, they were cheering for Rich to run faster.
Well, Rich needs all the help he can get to.
Oh, it was so funny. It was so funny. And then he'd look like, we were like, oh God, somebody better get Rich some oxygen. And I'm like, you think maybe it's time that Michael can run his own? Yeah.
And what happened?
He did. What he ended up doing, he would go to like second and just call his name once. But he had a valid concern. He was nervous that if Michael, would do it himself and was on second waiting for a hit, he would never be able to duck if the ball was coming at him. And I didn't want to rely on a 9-year-old to be standing there and tell him. So we just had a coach out of the base, and it worked out just fine.
Well, and we get back to the whole discussion that you sort of alluded to, a reasonable accommodation. The reality is that there's no reason not to allow for accommodations to permit people who are different than we to be able to perform the same thing. And again, we really collectively, I think, misjudge it a lot. But the fact is that Michael obviously proved he could do it. Now, what did Mitch do? Did he play baseball or any of that?
Oh, he sure did. He a few years later was on the exact same team. So that was Michael for his first season. The second season is when they won the championship. And I remember watching the whole thing unfold. And then when the whole town was on our sideline, watching and everything that happened, I thought, oh my gosh, this is like the feel good movie of the year. And I would talk about it. I'm like, I got to make this into a movie. Mitch played a few years later the same Orange Mets team. We are Phillies people. The fact that I have had two kids on teams called the Mets was brutal, brutal. But anyway, he was on that team, and he won the championship also. Mitchell was he's a completely different kind of kid, made a completely different impact, equally huge impact. But he was, they had to figure out real quick about him running the bases because he wanted to steal second. He didn't want to just run to second when there was a hit.
Yeah.
He wanted to steal bases. He figured it out. He was actually the fastest base runner on the team. Mitchell is quick. And he has an even, if it's even possible, an even better spatial memory. Or maybe because he had this little sliver of vision in the right corner of his right eye. And if he tilts his head just so, and he was so much smaller and closer to the ground, maybe he was able to navigate the baseline a little better. But he did the same thing. He hit off a tee. And he played the outfield, and I have this incredible picture of him and his best friend Nick on that team, and Nick's dad was the coach. Mitchell, Michael and Mitchell achieve everything they want in a day, right? Michael will do it all by himself. I mean, if he was moving in Florida the other day, and I swear he was going to try to figure out a way to get a U-Haul on his own because he did not want to wait for somebody, right? He does as much as he can all by himself. Accomplishes everything, and he's exhausted at the end of the day. Mitch uses every ounce of charm, good looks, everything to get people to do things for him to accomplish what he wants. And he's so crazy with it that when him and his buddy would come in from the outfield, I have a picture of it. Mitchell would hop on Nick's back like, "Oh, Nick, my legs are tired. We've been out here the whole inning. Give me a ride." And Nick would run with Mitchell on his back.
It's not a blindness issue.
Nope. It's a laziness issue.
Oh, gosh. Now, what is Michael doing today? You said Mitch was in college still.
Yeah, Michael graduated Penn State last year. And, I had said that one of my things I thought about was summa cum laude. And sure enough, he was summa cum laude from Penn State. And he had 2 majors, 2 minors, and a business certificate. There were a couple of semesters that he took 28 credits. They now have a law in Penn State. You can't do that. I said, if I get a second tuition bill that they think there's 2 of you, you're going to have to stop doing this. But he was a communications and audio engineering double major, and now he's at Disney in a situation where it's only Michael. I always say I'm coming back in my next life as my son, Michael, because things work out for him in ways that are just unbelievable. But my mom always says, Michael wakes up every day expecting it to be the greatest day and everything to work out. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, that's what happens for him. But he started with Disney in live entertainment, doing sound design and things like that. And then he had an opportunity to slide over to working in contracts, and he eventually wants to go to law school and be in copyright law and stuff like that. So he's like, oh, I could try that out for a little bit. So they're holding his position, the first position, while he tries the other one for 6 months and then decides what he wants to do. In this day and age where 70% of this community is unemployed, people aren't even going to work. Companies can't get people to work. And then they say to Michael's like, I would like to try this. And you want to hang on to that position in case I don't like it? And they said, sure. They're loving him down there.
You're speaking of Disney, and you were talking about descriptive audio descriptions. We got the Disney Channel. My wife and I signed up for Disney in 2019 because we wanted to watch Hamilton. And I assumed that it would be audio described, and it was. But before I watched Hamilton, I decided I want to go see one of my favorite Disney movies, if they have it, The Sign of Zorro, which goes back to, I think, 1959 with Guy Williams. And it was audio described. Disney has done a wonderful job of putting in audio descriptions on everything. I haven't watched Davy Crockett yet with Bess Parker, but I know it's going to be audio described.
Oh, man.
It's really amazing that they have done such a tremendous job of putting audio descriptions on the things that they do, which is wonderful.
Oh yeah. Well, Michael said they are so majorly focused on accessibility in all that they're doing now, especially at the parks, and he's on committees and all kinds of things, working on his ideas for. It's actually how he got the job. He in his interview, there's the whole thing in the blind community of whether you disclose or don't disclose your blindness in the interview. And I said to him, I go, of course, that we were coming out of the we were in Zoom times coming out of COVID when he had that interview. And I said, of course, it's your luck that you get to do a Zoom interview and they will never know. Michael is very good at setting up the camera and the lighting and looking straight on. So there was nothing to tell anybody visually that he's blind. And I said, are you going to disclose or not? And he was like, I have no idea. And he was 5 minutes before the interview. He still wasn't sure what he was going to do. And it just... a conversation. He called me afterwards and he said, well, I made the person cry. And I said, oh my God. He said they went through all the technical questions. And then there was something to the effect of how can you make Disney an even better company, or what can you really bring to the table? Something along those lines. Michael told a story about growing up. We used to go to the Disney parks every year. And he said one of the biggest reasons he loved going to the Disney parks is that they thought about kids like him. They thought about people that access the world differently, so he could have a phenomenal experience just like his sighted friends. And they could talk a lot about everything that they got out of being at the parks. He didn't feel like he missed out on anything. And he said, but also knowing what I know now and the things that I know professionally, we can make it 10 times better for all abilities, disabilities, all different ways that people access the world. I mean, he said it much more eloquently than that, and it was absolutely magnificent. And he harped on the fact that it was because of his blindness that he'd be the biggest asset, because he really knew that the couple of tweaks that they needed to do. And then this woman ends up in tears because she said she had never heard somebody so passionate and so confident that they could make the changes that would enhance the company. And she was in full belief that would happen. So after he tells me this whole thing, I said to him, so what you're saying is you disclosed.
Yeah. Well, it has always been a debate. And I realized, well, it's back in 1989. I had owned my own company for 4 years selling CAD, computer-aided design systems, to architects. I didn't need to work the system. All I needed to know was how to work it. And I decided, though, eventually I was going to go back into the workforce. So my wife and I were looking at jobs, and we found this great one that sounded perfect. And we talked about, do you say you're blind or not? And finally I went off and I wrote a cover letter, and I decided I'm a sales guy. Sure, I should be able to talk about it. And so I wrote in the cover letter, I said, the most important thing that you need to know about me is that I'm blind. And the reason that's important is because I have, as a blind person, have had to sell all of my life to convince people to let me buy a house, take a guide dog into places because we didn't have the ADA back then, rent an apartment, go into grocery stores, or do anything else that I wanted to do. So do you want to hire somebody who comes in for 8 or 10 hours a day and then they go home because the job is over? Or do you want to hire somebody who truly understands sales for the science and art that it is and sells 24 hours a day as a way of life? And I got the job because of that.
That's what I love. It's so many, and I was the same way for so long until recently, looking at it as, I gotta convince these people that this is okay and my kids are okay and it's going to be just fine. I got to convince them to give them the chance. Now I'm like, chance? Are you kidding me? Hiring someone like my Michael gives you the competitive edge. I'm like,
exactly.
They've got skills. They've been practicing. Oh my gosh. When everyone was talking about being resilient after COVID, Michael's like, if I hear resilient one more stinking time, he's like, we have been resilient 57 times a day since the day we were born. Like, oh my gosh, it was so funny. He's like, oh, the sighted people are being resilient now.
That's a beautiful thing. Well, and we keep hearing, and I heard it so often after September 11th, we got to get back to normal. And it took me a while to realize that's ridiculous. We can't get back to normal, or it'll happen again. Normal will never be the same. And I hear it after COVID and everything else. And we really need to to look at things differently than we do. And we need to give everyone the opportunity to use their gifts to be able to thrive as much as they can. We talked about conversation. One of the things that I think we need to do collectively is to change words we use. I've learned not to be a fan of the whole concept of blind and visually impaired. And I realized that my problem with visually impaired, after thinking it through, was twofold. One, just because I'm blind, I'm not visually different. Visually has nothing to do with that. That's what the experts did to screw it up. And impaired, compared to what? Why do I need to be compared with eyesight? So I believe that blind, low vision is a much more accurate terminology. Deaf people realize that some time ago. They will bristle or maybe eliminate you from the world if you say hearing impaired, for the very reason, visually impaired is a horrible thing, but that continues to promote the attitude that we really need to change.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And actually, when I was writing my children's book last summer, I wrote it, and then it just came out a few months ago. I have a friend that was my educational consultant on it in terms of words and language, and it's geared specifically for first graders, for 6-year-olds.
That's because you like them best.
Well, actually, it was funny because this is how I love looking back on my journey and seeing where everything just aligned beautifully. And this is why I had said earlier, I really pay attention now when things happen to take it all in so that I don't have to wait 10 years to see the gain as opposed to the loss. So
yeah,
when I was getting so frustrated in my work with my first book, Thriving Blind, was wonderful. I mean, it was, 13 people that were role models for me and my boys, and I'm sharing them with the world. And so that opened a lot of doors to a lot of stages and a lot of conversations. And then, with this unemployment statistics, and I do the short film to convince companies and adults, I felt like I've worked 24 hours a day and I'm still kind of banging my head against the wall trying to change the biases of adults. And then I said to myself, what if the bias never happens in the first place? What if kids come into the world with a whole different story about blindness, just like the kids that grew up with my kids? Those kids that grew up with my kids, they're out in the world, they'll meet a blind person, and I'm certain that they're like, what football team were you on? What position did you play in baseball? How many college degrees do you have? They have a whole different view of blindness than the rest of the world. So I said, how about if I do a children's book that we tell them from the very beginning that differences, it's not that they don't matter. It's that it's what makes you unique, and it's what's inside of you and what you believe about yourself is what matters, because the world's going to tell you a whole bunch of different things. And so to the point of my educational consultant, she was looking at it as making it educationally sound to be in schools and align with curriculum and all that kind of stuff. But we went through every single word to make sure that every single word was empowering and not, the word disability isn't even in the book. It's abilities. We say the words are, it's in first person about the child telling themselves all this. And it's about my abilities make me me. There's nothing about dis in there.
Well, what I've also realized is that there's nothing wrong with the term disability. It's a characteristic. And the reality is disability doesn't need to mean lack of ability. And sighted people have as much a disability as blind people, except that since Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb in 1877, we've covered up your disability by making sure that you have light everywhere you go, but it doesn't change the fact that it's there. And we really don't deal with the whole issue at all. But, I was in a hotel in March and the power went out. And so when it did, of course, everybody started to scream because they couldn't see and they were grabbing for their phones and or looking for flashlights, and all that proves my point. The fact is that disability doesn't mean a lack of ability, and we all have that characteristic in one way or another. And it's high time that we start to move away from thinking just because some people's characteristics are more visible than others, that they're less than we are. That's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, when that message was delivered to my Michael by way of Eric Weihenmayer, the mountain climber, when Michael was 6 when he met Eric. Eric had just come off Everest back then and was being honored in the city of Philadelphia with this big award. And I took Michael down there to meet him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at my little Michael, right, in his little suit. He was short for his age. And I watched the moment of him talking with Eric and realizing in his own little mind, oh my gosh, this blind guy is the coolest. He's just like me. He just did the coolest thing. And he had never met a sighted person that climbed Everest. He'd never met anybody that cool. And this guy happened to be just like him. So in that moment at 6, Michael believed that anything was possible for him.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric talks in the speech that he gave and in the conversation with Michael, it was all about the tools that he had to figure out. Like he was in full responsibility he took full responsibility to achieve that goal. And it was all on him to achieve it. And he believed he could do it and he found people to help him. That was the message that Michael got that day. And it never wavered. It has never wavered in his mind that he believes that things are possible for him. He just has to go get the tools and build a team and do all the things. So I thought, gosh, I need all 6-year-olds, whether they're blind, sighted, deaf, whatever, to understand that, or to at least get the correct story that what they can do in this world is up to them, not what other people think about them. And let's change that and put the correct story out with the little kids, because I'm tired of changing adults' minds. It's much harder work. It's much easier. And because I taught first grade and I was like a Broadway show with some of the books that I really love. But this book is just like going on a bear hunt, and you're all these actions and you're meeting these cool people. And then you don't even know that they're blind until the end of the story. Like it's just, you're riding a skateboard and you're climbing a mountain and you're painting a picture. Like it's just really fun stuff. Because I feel like so much of the information that's there for people to get educated about blindness is boring, or it's like heavy, right? Like it's a lot for people to take in, where I'm like, why isn't it just part of the regular story? It's just a regular story happening. And oh, by the way, here's the tools that they use to be able to do that, because they don't use their eyes to see. Like no big deal. But let's talk about that. Like it's just simple and fun, and let's change the story from, like I've been saying, from the youngest sets of eyes.
Is there an accessible version of the book?
It's only printed in an accessible version. It's in print and Braille.
It's in print and Braille.
Yeah, and that's the only format we're doing it in right now, which is incredibly expensive. So we're doing a whole new campaign for that. But
where is it available in Braille?
It's at the website whaticanbeisuptome.com.
Got it. You might, there are organizations like bookshare.org that could also put it out in on-demand Braille, if that helps.
Yeah, you know what? Thriving Blind is in Bookshare. I have to reach out to them and get this in there. There's a Imagination Storybooks. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're now doing their stuff is just incredible. It's a video of the book with audio description and narration, and you can also download the what do you call it, the BRF file.
Wow.
The other thing with the book is it's not only in print and Braille. All of the illustrations were done by a low vision and colorblind artist, and all of them have in Braille picture descriptions in the text.
Okay. That's still pretty cool. And I'm glad that you're doing what you can to make it accessible and available, which is great. So what other kinds of projects are you working on?
Well, we've got a busy summer that we're stepping into here. Mitchell and I, since he's home for the summer, we're recording the audio version of Thriving Blind. He's doing all the guide chapters and I'm doing everything else. Half the chapters are women, half are guys, and he's recording all the guide chapters. And then me, Michael, and Mitchell are working on getting Michael's got this idea that he says is so simple, it's ridiculous, to have all of the sports stadiums be able to, for a person that is blind to tune in. Let me get the wording right. Tune into the live broadcast in real time.
Right.
Because it's driving them crazy. Some of the games, the one Phillies game Mitch and I were at last year, the audio was 15 seconds delayed.
Yeah,
okay.
That makes it really
Mitchell can't stand to be half a second delayed from anything.
Yeah, I know what he means.
Oh my, he was losing his mind. So that sparked us to say, what's out there? So Michael looked at it all, and knowing what he knows from the live entertainment industry, he says it's a very easy thing that we'll be able to tap into.
It's easy to do if they'll do it. I mean,
Yeah.
I know why the delay is there, but by the same token, for having a special process to be able to be there right on time, for some of us is pretty valuable. So I think it's
so we're hoping to get that in play before we get to an Eagles game. We shall see. But then the big one is Michael and I are working on the screenplay for the baseball. We're combining the two seasons in one, for the purpose of storytelling.
Right.
To get that message out there in a big way I thought, man, this baseball sports, that's a commonality that you get a lot of people understand that. And then because I'm telling you, for years now, every time I mention him playing baseball in speeches or wherever I am, always that's where people stop me. Wait a second. Okay, we understand that blind people can do IT and they can be attorneys and we got you. They can do all the things, but baseball, I'm like, sure. Yep, with the reasonable accommodation.
I grew up riding a bike.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of those big game changers and really starting to open people's eyes and minds to stop looking at it the way you've been looking. I keep saying the true story of blindness out there. There's too many false stories out there.
Way too many. What is the Succeed Without Summit, and when will that be happening?
Oh, the Succeed Without Sight Summit. We have that on December 2nd.
Hard to say.
Through Thriving Blind Academy. This will be the fourth one. The first one I did during COVID, just to figure out a way to continue getting people motivated to get out there and live the lives of their dreams. We have now been in, last year's was 6 continents, 27 countries, thousands of people. And we do it all on Zoom. It's one whole day of it's a balance between some practical, like this year we're going to have a whole session with a parent that did homeschool, a parent that sent their kid to a school for the blind, and a parent that sent them to a public school, and compare and contrast, like those kinds of things. And then also really fun speakers. Clark Reynolds, the blind artist from London, always comes in and wows the crowd with all of his fun stuff. And then we're going to be doing some kind of behind the scenes, very real conversations of real struggles that folks are going through with college and how they figure them out and following people's journey. So that'll be really fun. Yeah,
it sounds it. Well, if people want to reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing and maybe get advice and your assistance, or maybe want to help, how do they do that?
Well, I'm on pretty much every social media platform. You can also find everything I do at KristinSmedley.com. Families and individuals impacted by blindness that are looking to take the next step forward to get into the lives of their dreams and take the wheel of their own drive can look at thrivingblindacademy.org. And I'm Kristin at thrivingblindacademy.org. Shoot me an email. And Smedley is spelled? Smedley. And I'm Kristin with an IN. Right, Kristin. Well, perfect. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and to talk with us. And needless to say, you can imagine I love having this conversation, and we should do another one and go into it further and maybe get Michael and or Mitch to come on. Mitch can't be lazy though, but it would be fun to do. Oh, he loves being on camera and on the mic. There you go. Yeah, he's got radio shows, so he could talk all day. we should talk about it. Well, I want to thank you again, and I hope all of you enjoyed listening to us today. Love to get your comments. Please feel free to email me, michaelhi
at accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast, Michael Hingson, MICHAELHINGSON.com/podcast. Please, wherever you're listening, we would appreciate a 5-star rating. We love those, and we value your input and comments. If you know of someone else who ought to be a guest, please let us know. But we also just want to hear your thoughts about today. And Kristin, same for you. If you know other people who we ought to have as a guest on the podcast, really would appreciate any thoughts and suggestions that you have. But I want to just thank you one more time for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Thanks for having this platform where you are also sharing the true stories of blindness. Love it.